Well, hello there, Tampa Bay, and welcome to the Tampa Bay Community Network Sports Talk. I'm your host, Coach Chuck White, and my guest is Coach Richard Schmidt, men's basketball coach at the University of Tampa, a good friend of mine and a longtime friend of mine. And we're going to have a great talk about the University of Tampa and himself. So first of all, Coach Smith, let me just say welcome to the show.
Glad to be here, Chuck.
Well, it's always a pleasure to have you here. We've done this before, but not at the Tampa Bay Community Network here, and our listeners should get much from this. But let's start off, first of all, during your early interest in sports, what was it about basketball or any sport that you took interest to?
Well, when I was growing up, of course, I was a better baseball player than I was a basketball player, and I played baseball from the time I was very young. But when you get to high school, basketball is just more fun than anything else. And of course, I played high school basketball. Not very good, of course, but at least I played, and it was just a lot more fun. Baseball, as much as I liked it and I was very good at it, I was much better at baseball than I was basketball, but there's just something about that basketball game that is more enjoyable, and it's just a lot more fun to play.
Well, it's bigger. It's easy to handle. It won't hurt you when it's coming at you like them ground
Well, that's
balls.
true. When somebody's throwing 90 miles an hour and hit you, that tends to hurt a little bit.
Man.
But you can get an elbow in the face sometime in basketball. Doesn't feel too good either, you know.
I'm telling you, I've had my lips burst many a time. Well, anyway, Coach, did you play, I just asked you, did you play high school basketball or high school or college basketball or any sport in college or high school?
Well, I made I went to Western Kentucky University there in Bowling Green, Kentucky. I'm from up around Louisville. I went out for the basketball team when I got there as a walk-on. I made the freshman team and played a little bit, but like I said, I wasn't what you would call a great basketball player, Chuck.
Well, you know, when I went to college, most of the college, they didn't allow freshmen to play varsity basketball.
Right.
They had freshman basketball teams. And I may say not bragging, but I passed by that freshman team and I broke in and started on the varsity.
Wow, you were really good. I wasn't that good. I was lucky just to be up, make the freshman team. You know?
Well, I guess I was just blessed with talent because every day we went to the basketball courts, early in the morning till late at night, we were on the basketball court, and we had to learn how to play something about that game. Well, Coach, during the time that you play it, you must have ventured or saw somebody coaching that you admired and led you to feel like you wanted to be a coach.
Well, you know, it was funny. When I was in college at Western, when I was a junior, a friend of mine who lived in the same dorm with me, I don't know how he had gotten to be the head coach at it was a private, I think, private high school.
Yes.
And I think he was trying to coach the junior varsity team and the varsity high school teams. And he asked me if I'd come over when the season was half over. I think the team had not even won a game. And I went over and took them over, and luckily I didn't know what I was doing, to be honest, at the time, but we ended up only losing one more game the rest of the season, you know, and that kind of got me going in basketball. And then when I graduated, I went back to Louisville, and I was really lucky. You know, you got to be lucky in life. I went to Westport High School where Bill Olson was the head coach. And after I was there a year, the freshman coach had left, and he asked me to come on his staff and be a freshman basketball coach. And Bill Olson, you know, went on to be assistant coach for Denny Crum at the University of Louisville. And then he was the AD at the University of Louisville for a lot of years and was responsible for building that football program at the University of Louisville and the basketball program. You know, they won a couple, 2 or 3 national championships. So that was luck. You know, you have to have luck.
Well, they say it's better to be lucky than good sometimes. And what's for you, you're going to get. But Coach, what kind of goals that you set yourself, that you set up for yourself during your coaching years? What kind of goals?
Well, when you get to this level that we're on now, and I've been the head coach at Vanderbilt, and I think your goals are always to win a national championship as a coach. You've got to, you've got to think that is your main goal. Now that's very hard to do nowadays because there's so much talent everywhere. But I think that has to be your goal, and the more you learn about the game, those goals become even more important to you, to achieve the very best that you can be. And the top would be to win a national championship. Now, we haven't won it. We've been to the Final Four before, and we've done very well. We won a lot of ball games, but you haven't achieved that goal yet, Chuck, to win the national championship.
So you haven't accomplished that goal yet, but you're still looking forward to it. One coach had a pyramid to success. UCLA coach, I think it was.
John Wooden, yes.
John Wooden. Did you idolize him in any manner?
Well,
like everybody else did.
Well, John Wooden, I've had an opportunity to meet him when I was a high school coach. Back at Ballard High School in Louisville, Kentucky, I had some good players. I had a lot of good players that played for me, and I was able to meet John because Denny Crum was recruiting one of my players, and at one of the All-Star games, he brought John Wooden in to talk to me in the hotel room, and I've got to meet John pretty good. But I always kind of, I guess the people that I looked forward to, because I wasn't around, John was all the way out in California, but Bobby Knight was close up in Indiana, Denny Crum, and Dean Smith were kind of the three guys I tried to, I did a lot of things like they did. I would study what they did and try to put that into, you have to, I still think you have to put it into what fits your personality, but you get that stuff from the best people. Those three coaches were always pretty successful, and so those are the kind of guys that I really followed.
Well, yes. There were a lot of books out when I first started coaching, and I was a sapper. Everything I saw on TV, everything I heard a coach say or whatever, I tried to adopt it. And one guy said, Coach, slow down. Say, don't try to take what some other coach has done or is doing and fit it to your talent. Try to let your talent dictate to you what type of things you want it to do. How do you see that?
I agree with that. There are a lot of coaches in our profession that only want to do certain things, as you just said. And no matter what their talent is, they want to fit them in.
Right.
I've been able to do what you said. Each year on our level, we don't have as many scholarships, as a lot of the D1 schools. So you have to get certain kids, and you got to fit what they do best into your program, But there's still that overall philosophy of conditioning and all that kind of stuff that you can get. But you need to take your talent that you have and use it to the best of its ability,
Guys come from this place of what he played in high school and or college. He wants to adopt that same system into his play, and the players that he has are not the same type of talent
right
from whence he's come. Well, Coach, many times we look back on ourselves, how long we've coached some of the top players. People ask me often, who's the best player that you ever coached? What's the best team? Can you talk about some of the top teams or players that you had you like to just reminisce on?
I've had a lot of people ask me the same thing. Who's the best player you've ever had at the University of Tampa? That's a tough call. We had Todd Leonard, who was a first-team All-American 3 years in a row, Division II player twice, drafted by Seattle Supersonics. But, we've had a lot of other good players. Nate Johnson, who was drafted by the Miami Heat and played for Portland. they're different, you know. And
Yeah.
I don't like to say one guy's better than the other. It just changes as years go by. When I was a high school coach, I coached a kid named Jeff Lamp, who was a first-round draft choice in the NBA and was a first-team All-American, McDonald's All-American, and all that stuff. So I've had a lot of good players, but I never like to say one is better than the other, you know, because every year it kind of changes down the road, and you have a lot of good players, and like you said before, they're all different in their talent, so you try to get the best out of whatever talent they have, and sometimes that it's just different. Todd was very good, but he probably wasn't as good as, say, some guards sometimes. So I don't like to do that. I just can't hardly say this guy's better, and you know, I don't like to do that.
I noticed you said some of them went to professional basketball.
Yeah.
And many times a guy said, well, he didn't go pro, or he went in the 3rd round, and some guy went in the 5th round. It depends on what the pros have at that time and need.
Right.
They may not need somebody at the time, need somebody in your position at the time you're coming out, as opposed to the time when this other guy came out, they were wide open for needs and things.
Well, you're exactly right, you know, and a lot of times when a draft is going on, they might draft a player, but like you said, they don't really need him, and so they may not even give him a no-cut contract, and either they're going to try to trade him right away or not. So you never know. There's been a whole lot of good players that never made it in the NBA.
Yes, sir.
Because of what you just said. It just wasn't the right time for them.
That's right. Well, Coach, can you look back on some teams, just the overall, since we don't want to single out any individual player, can you look at any team that you give memory to, and usually that probably was a championship team, and many times it has not got to be a championship team. It's just the way the guys came to practice, stayed together, and did this. So talk to me about that.
Well, the best team I guess we ever had at the University of Tampa was a team that went to the Final Four, and we got beat in overtime by 1 point, which is a long story. And then the next night, that team that beat us, which we led the whole game, won the national championship by 30 points. So we should have won it, but it was just, the circumstances weren't, just wasn't there
at
that year for us to win it.
Yeah.
But you know, the teams early on with Nate Johnson and Todd Linder on it was probably just as good as that team. But as you said, you can have great teams that maybe not win as much because of the kids are all together, they stick together, they play as hard as they can. And you know, as a coach, that gives you as much satisfaction as a team that wins a lot. Maybe they're not as good and they can't go to a national championship tournament, but they're close to knit team. They stay together. They do whatever you ask of them.
Yeah, man.
And it's a pleasure to coach them. And I've had several of those teams too.
You can't wait to get to practice on
Right.
those days. And you've had teams sometimes you just didn't want to go to practice, but you had to. Well, I like to look back at your team when you had this guy from Robinson High School, and he had a brother over at one of the schools in Lakeland.
Yeah, he went to Florida Southern. his
Florida
brother.
Southern. I used to like to see when
Chucky Powell was
Powell,
from.
when they come.
And when they played against each other, it was a battle. Their brothers.
Oh man, they didn't know each other either when they
I tell
started
you
playing.
what, those were fun years because of those brothers going against each other, and they battled it out. Chucky had a big heart, boy.
Yes.
Of course, his brother was tough too. His brother was a tough player. So we had some great games. We always had some great games with Florida Southern. It's been a nip and tucker over the years.
Coach, many people want to know why University of Tampa does not play South Florida. Let the people hear that, why they don't play. Is it because of the conference, because of the agreement you have?
You know, we played them, I think, 3 or 4 times, and, you know, we beat them 2 or 3 times. And they're D1, we're D2. I think it would be really good for the community for us to play.
Yes.
It'd be good for basketball in this area. But it's a disadvantage for them to play us. Just think if we ever beat them, it hurts their overall power rating. And nowadays, the NCAA has made that power rating so important.
Yes.
For making the NCAA tournament. It's just very difficult for those kind of people to play a good D2 team anymore. You know, Chuck, when I first got in it, D2 was not nearly as good as it is now. D2 is really good. There's very little difference right now in the top D2 teams and the low-level D1 teams because there's so many good players now. There's much larger percentage of good players now. Like this past year, there comes out a list of D1 people that want to transfer to other schools. There was over 600 kids on that list. And so many of those kids who went D1, and we actually had a commitment from one of them that started. We actually got one that started some D1, but then something happened. Maybe they recruited past them the next year because kids keep getting better. So nowadays, you're 600 kids, and half of those kids ended up back playing D2. So there's not a whole lot of difference anymore.
I heard you use the word recruiting. Is that a dirty word to you? Is that something you like to do or you need to do? And how do you go about recruiting? What rules control or sanction?
Well, the NCAA has a whole lot of rules on us about recruiting. So we have to follow the NCAA rules. I've always kind of enjoyed recruiting, making home visits with parents and so forth. Especially on the D1 level, that you really have to do that a lot, and it's really involved. On our level, it's a little bit different. You still do it, but not as much because you have, as I said before, there's so many D1 kids now wanting to transfer back so they can play all the time. It's not as involved with the parents and so forth. But I've been very lucky to have assistant coaches that are very good recruiters. The Coach Pekka that I have right now is very good, and we kind of enjoy it. You know, you bring in a kid for into a visit. You might go to his home visit with his parents, and then you invite him to come in, and you give them a 48 hours. They can come in and stay on your campus, and you know, you wine and dine them and show them around and try to get them to come to your school. And it's heartbreaking sometimes if you lose a kid you really think you had and you really wanted and you thought he really wanted you, but it's kind of fun at the same time.
If a guy verbally commit to you, yes, coach, I want to be a Spartan, I want to come to the University of Tampa, but somewhere before the time to sign, he said, I think I'd rather go to someplace else because I got an uncle or cousin there and I want to be in that area. How do you feel about that, and what are the rules and regulations to that? Can you make him still come because he verbally, or you?
No, you cannot make him come. Verbal commitments mean very little.
Yes.
Very little. Unless they sign a national letter of intent, you have no binding on them at all with verbal commitments. A lot of kids verbally commit and then back out at the last minute. You know, you hope they won't, but so far, I don't think I've had that problem very often. But I know you hear about it a lot.
Yes.
On the D1 level. Guys commit early, and it's not the signing. See, there's an early signing period, like 1 week in November, and then after the season's over, you've got there's a certain date that starts that you can sign. Well, in between those times, you could verbally commit. Schools get people to verbally commit. Nowadays, they're getting juniors to verbally commit to these big schools like Duke, Kentucky, and that stuff. But it's really not binding on them at all.
Coach, you've been talking about the D1 Division One,
Right.
and you've been talking about the D2, Division Two. Now I know a lot of housewives and some persons who are not familiar with that. Kind of break that down where they can understand what's the difference in a D1 school and a D2 and et cetera.
Well, D1s, first of all, they have 15 scholarships, and most of the time that's all of the schools that you're going to see playing on TV and stuff. And they have more scholarships and more money than we do. And a lot of times what everybody thinks the best players go D1. And that's a misnomer sometimes, because there's been a lot of guys that I've found, as you know, you've seen a lot of my kids that I found that nobody else even offered scholarships to that could play D1 easily. And then D2, like it used to be, D1 had 15 full scholarships and D2 had 12. Then they cut it, D1 down to 13 full scholarships and D2 down to 10. And also we can split our scholarships up and give half scholarships and partial scholarships on the D2 level. D1, unless I'm wrong, unless they've changed it, if you give a scholarship in D1, it's a full scholarship. You don't give partials on the D1 level. So I guess, does that explain it enough?
Yes, to me.
I'm sure there's other
Yeah.
there's other things, but the scholarships are different, and the money spent on the programs is usually different.
How can you transfer from one level to the next and continue playing? And what happens if you transfer from one and won't be able to play?
Okay. A D1 player, let's say he wants to transfer. If he transfers to another D1 school, he has to sit out a year. Mm-hmm. He has to sit out a year. He gets to go to school, he can practice, but he can't play for 1 year. So he has 1 year residence at the school. Now, a player from D1 that wants to transfer and play right away and doesn't want to sit out a year, if he transfers to D2, he's eligible right away and he can play that right away. Mm-hmm. And that's why we have a couple of players that, you know, that we've had over the last couple of years. They wanted to play, they didn't want to sit out, so they come down and play with us. And that's what I was telling you. That's why D2 has gotten to be so good. A lot of those kids don't want to transfer and sit out a year.
That's right.
So they can transfer back to us and play right away.
Talk about fans at basketball games. You know, they say, don't go to this school, or whenever you go to the school, there's some rowdy fans. And how do you like for your fans to be, and how have you received your fans to have been?
Well, I like for them to be rowdy, but sometimes the administrations don't really like it so much. Mm-hmm. But on our level here in Florida, we don't get the same kind of powerful fans that you do, say, up north, where there's nothing else to do but to go to a basketball game or a football game. Down here, there's so many things to do. We don't get as many fans, but we do have some really good fans. And we get your students to get a little rowdy, and I like that. It gives you that, you know, that home court advantage a little bit. If you got people ranting and raving on people, and we got some of it in our league. We got some really tough fans sometimes over at Florida Southern. We got some tough fans over at Rollins College. They get on my players sometime, and kind of I like it because then my players kind of they like that, and they play a little harder sometimes.
Yes. Let's invite the fans in the community to the University of Tampa's gymnasium to a basketball game. What kind of promotion takes place?
Well, of course we have people that are in charge of promotions at our school, and I'm sure we try to get. We run a lot of specials in the community to get people to come to the games, and We have a lot of good stuff goes on. Of course, a lot of it goes on at the halftime when I'm in the locker room. You know, they got people coming out of the stands and shooting free throws and all that stuff like you do pretty much everywhere. I don't see a lot of it, but they tell me about it. 'Cause I'm usually in the locker room ranting and raving why we didn't do this right, why we didn't do that right. But you know, I think our school's doing a good job of promoting and that kind of stuff to trying to get fans to come in. And you know, this area has not been as, you know, as big a basketball area as it should be because there's a lot of good basketball here.
Well, Coach, we got just a few minutes, and I know there are a lot of high school parents of athletes, both male and female. Let's talk to them what they should be doing and looking out for with their student athlete, preparing them for college.
Well, the first thing, they got to get their grades. School is very important, and we run into that constantly when you're out recruiting. You see a great player, you go into the school and you get his transcripts and they send it to you, and they're just not prepared. A lot of them, you've got to make sure nowadays you got the right classes in school. You've got to have good grades because then you have to pass one of the, you know, the ACT or the SAT, one of those things. So it's a good idea for parents to be on top of their youngsters to make sure that they're getting the right classes throughout high school and to make sure that they're getting the good grades, doing their homework, and preparing. They need to take some of those practice tests for the SAT and the ACT because the NCAA has rules on all of that, what kind of score you have to make on these tests to be able to even get in college. So it's very important for the parents to be on top of that kind of stuff.
Well, Coach, it's been a pleasure having you here on our
Chuck.
show. And I know many fans have gotten a lot from this show because you're always a good interviewer and you have a lot to say to people. So we hope you've enjoyed this show today as much as we've enjoyed bringing it to you. So be with us again on our next show right here on the Tampa Bay Community Network Sports Talk.